Interpretation is enabled for this event, and you can access it on the bottom of the screen by clicking on the interpretation icon. Video and speech are not enabled for attendees, but you can participate by including your questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. The moderator will then read them out during the Q&A portion of the panel. We have many people joining us today, so these arrangements are to ensure that the presentations can proceed without interruptions. Once again, thanks for joining us, and I'll now pass the floor to Senator Colin Deacon.
Thanks, Benedicta, and welcome to everyone. On behalf of my colleague, Senator Christmas, who sadly can't be with us today, Senator Moodie, and our moderator, Senator Tannas. Thank you for joining us at an event that we've been anxiously looking forward to. Our focus today is to learn from three remarkable Canadians as we work to find ways to systematically address racism in Canada, and so that we can begin to reliably unlock the full economic potential of our country, thanks to our diverse population, creating greater prosperity for all Canadians. Today, I'm speaking to you from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, who have shared their land in peace and friendship. Our country's First Peoples continue to fight for the recognition of their constitutional rights, in addition to dealing with the pervasive issue of racism. Recently, with the support of colleagues from the African Canadian Senators Group, my office completed a yet-to-be-released survey of Black entrepreneurs in Canada. I'll share one number that stood out for me. 76% of respondents said that their race represented a barrier to their business success. Simply, racism is an unacceptable barrier facing too many of Canada's current and future entrepreneurs in 2021. Despite pervasive challenges, great successes are emerging, successes that we need to understand and replicate. To this end, we're going to hear from three fantastic panelists: Shahrzad Rafati, Chief Terry Paul, and Mr. Wes Hall. Each brings powerful insights and an inspiring story. Their individual successes demonstrate the immense economic opportunity that can be unlocked in our country when we prioritize diversity as a strength. Each of these entrepreneurial leaders have excellent advice to share with parliamentarians and entrepreneurs, and both groups are represented on the call today. We're looking forward to receiving your questions of our panelists, or for our panelists, and using the Q&A function as Benedicta mentioned. After we hear from each speaker, our moderator, Senator Scott Tannas, will start off with a couple of questions before moving to yours in the Q&A. So please don't wait too long to ask your questions, because we expect a lot of them and we'll want to get to as many as we can. Before we introduce our first speaker, we're very pleased to play a message from retired Senator Don Oliver, who served in the Senate for 23 years. Senator Oliver is a successful business leader who has been a tireless champion of diversity and inclusion in Canada throughout his life. Senator Oliver.
Thank you for those kind comments. Thank you as well for providing this opportunity for me to make a few remarks. The death of George Floyd was probably the greatest catalyst for change in the ways to attack anti-Black systemic racism in Canada. His horrendous death at the hands of a white policeman in modern-day USA was viewed in real time by millions around the globe, who in a common internal protest said, "Enough is enough, enough is enough." Wes Hall, founder of BNI, was one of those who said, "Enough is enough." That same racism, based on the premise that white privilege must prevail, has prevented a large group of Canadians, BIPOC Canadians, from participating in our economic growth equal partners, and Canada has been the big loser. We are a trading nation, and in order to maintain our competitive edge, we must be creative and innovative. We must always be hungry for new ideas and new ways to penetrate international markets in places and in countries where people look different from the white people of Canada and who speak different languages. Canada's anti-Black systemic racism has prevented our reaching the trade plateau where we could be best in class, where our collective prosperity can be unlocked and unleashed. It has now been proven by countless successful, forward-thinking corporations, institutes, organizations, and others that acceptance of difference is at the heart of the business case for diversity. That is, acceptance of different. Diverse companies are more likely today to easily outperform less diverse peers on profitability. Diverse workshops and companies have higher profits, greater revenue to the bottom line, that is, have less turnover, a more positive corporate culture, and just better financial performance. That is, in essence, the business case for diversity that I have been speaking about for decades and that I worked hard on in my 23 years in the Senate, and it works. I want to commend, before closing, the work of Senator Colin Deacon and his team of willing senators for having undertaken to challenge the Senate of Canada on constitutional grounds to become more proactive in combating racism. Thank you for this opportunity.
And thank you, Senator Oliver. I couldn't agree with you more on these important words that you've just shared with us. It is my pleasure to introduce Shahrzad Rafati to be our first panelist today. Shahrzad is the founder, chairperson, and CEO of Broadband TV, a media tech company. In October of 2020, she led BBTV's IPO on the TSX, making history as one of the top 10 tech listings of all time and as the largest across all sectors with a sole female founder and CEO, and the first in the technology sector. She has built an incredibly successful company which has demonstrated phenomenal growth and has built a quadruple bottom line business that measures success not only on financial performance, but on building a culture that supports employees, the community at large, and protecting the environment. A champion for social change, for equality in all forms, for job creation, climate action, education, and advancing opportunities for women and girls. Shahrzad was appointed as co-chair of the G20 Empower, a private sector alliance intended to support the greater recruitment and advancement of women in leadership in the private sector in each of the G20 countries by the Prime Minister in 2020. Shahrzad, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And I wanted to thank you, Senator Moodie, and of course, Senator Deacon and Senator Tannas for really organizing an event with such an important topic. I want to start by saying that I'm a cisgender female. I'm a first-generation immigrant to Canada, and I self-identify as a person of color. And I'm really, truly honored. I feel very honored to be here, of course, today alongside such an esteemed panelist and really share my lived experiences and my thoughts on how really improving diversity can really bring much greater, prosperity to our economy and overall as a nation and also our world. And I wanted to also recognize that, we're on sacred lands of Indigenous people and nations. And I believe that in really equality of all of its form. And I know that today we're going to be discussing specifically this great topic. And I do want to highlight that, look, when we talk about diversity, diversity in all of its forms is really a need for human rights. And I greatly believe that equal is equal. And I believe that when you actually really solve for one form of inequality, you really create room to solve for other forms especially given the intersectional lens. And I'm particularly passionate about gender equality. You know, as you mentioned, I represent Canada and I'm the co-chair of G20 Empower, which is really to an alliance to help specifically with advancement of women in economic and when it comes to social health and economic empowerment. And our focus is really to increase the number of women in leadership roles. And I'm sure we're going to cover a range of topics today. And I, of course, welcome your questions, but I specifically want to share my thoughts and expertise around gender equality. And I'm very much so looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Shahrzad. And I got to tell you, it really impresses me that you built a business in such a competitive sector. I look forward someday to learning a lot more about your business, but there's 1 billion hours of video watched online every I think every hour or so every day. So the competition's amazing, and your global reputation is phenomenal. I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce Chief Terry Paul. I'd like to start by giving you some perspective as to the trust that Member 2 has in its remarkable leader. Consider the fact that Chief Paul was first elected to office in 1984. That was Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's last year in office. In the subsequent 37 years, we've seen 5 more prime ministers who collectively have grown the Canadian economy by about 4.5-fold. Over that same period, Member 2's economy has grown more than 16-fold. During a dire period in the early 90s, the band employed about 50 people and was struggling to meet payroll. Today, Member 2 is an economic driver in its region of Nova Scotia, with more than 1,000 Mi'kmaq and other Cape Bretoners going to work in the community every day. This transformation is referred to as the Member 2 miracle, but it's no miracle. This success demanded a high level of investment and highly strategic and determined approach to building a culture of entrepreneurship across the community. Member 2's success was not accomplished by discovering a gold mine, but by increasingly harnessing the gold that rests within the entrepreneurial potential of Chief Paul's entire community. Chief Paul is a founder of the National Aboriginal Capital Corporation Association, which has grown from 7 to 50 members. In January of this year, Chief Paul led a coalition of Mi'kmaq communities and other partners in the $500 million acquisition of Clearwater Seafoods, one of North America's largest fully integrated seafood companies. This deal suggests that despite the incredible accomplishments to date, Chief Paul and his community are just getting started. As we hear from Chief Paul, consider the success achieved by his small community of Member 2 in the context of countless communities across our country that have not benefited from this transformation. I believe that the success achieved in Member 2 compels us to identify the specific conditions for success that will enable this potential to be reliably unlocked across Canada. Chief Paul, over to you.
Apologies, Senator Deacon. Chief Paul is having a few technical issues, so if we can move on to Mr. Hall, and whenever Chief Paul is ready to go, we can circle back to him.
Okay, we'll do that. Well, then I'll look forward to introducing Wes Hall. I've heard of Wes for many, many years. The first time was when my nephew Jeff worked with him in the earliest years of his firm, Kingsdale Advisors. More recently, it was as Wes's vision and determination became more broadly recognized to all Canadians when he formed the Black North Initiative. On Bay Street and beyond, Wes's advice is highly valued and his capabilities deeply respected. He's the founder of Kingsdale, one of the most trusted advisors for public companies across North America. It's estimated that at any one time, 20 of Canada's 60 largest companies relies on Wes and his firm to provide advice as it relates to their largest and most important transactions. What is less known is that Wes is a serial entrepreneur, investing in dozens of businesses beyond Kingsdale, from a large environmental industrial services company to a respected supplier in Alberta's oil and gas industry to hotels in the Caribbean. Hundreds of employees in these companies demonstrate that diversity and inclusivity unlock greater economic benefits and opportunities for all. Wes's philanthropic contributions also often go unseen. yet place him among the most generous of Canadians. The beneficiaries are not just major charities, but thousands of students in Canada and the Caribbean who have found that their doors to education have been opened by Wes and have also benefited from his advice and time. Lastly, it's truly remarkable that within just a few weeks last summer, Wes established and launched the Black North Initiative. Black North's purpose is singularly focused on removing the systemic barriers that are negatively affecting Black Canadians and too often preventing them from achieving to their potential. Wes garnered pledges from more than 300 CEOs whose companies have a combined market value of more than $1 trillion. These CEOs have pledged to meaningfully and measurably address systemic racism. The pace at which Wes garnered this support and commitment speaks to the extent to which he is respected by Canada's business leaders and how fortunate we are to hear from him today. Wes, over to you.
Senator Deacon and others, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to be in front of this esteemed group. I've never had the privilege of addressing senators or any kind of government bodies at this scale. So it is an honor for me to be here and for you to invite me to be here. And I just want to make one slight correction, Senator Deacon, that it's now over 500 companies that have signed the Black North Pledge, and that number is growing larger. I would like to start my introduction by saying a little bit about who I am, right? I have a picture, this picture here, that I actually keep on my desk on Bay Street when I'm working from the office. And now that I'm working virtually, I bring it here to work with to my office, my virtual office. This is the town that I grew up in St. Thomas, Golden Grove, Jamaica. And this picture is the house. That's my grandmother. That's me at about 19 years old. And if you look closely at that image, you'll see that that house is built on stilts because we would get heavy flooding in that neighborhood, and the water would come all the way up to the veranda. And I remember being a child, sitting on that veranda where those kids are, my feet dangling in the water without a care in the world. That's really where I came from. My grandmother, I have 14 brothers and sisters, and was lucky enough to come to Canada September 27, 1985, a Friday. The reason why I kept that picture really close to me, and it travels with me wherever I go, for two reasons. One is to remind me of where I came from and never to forget that. And two is to really give honor to this great country of ours, that as a result of coming from a place like that and be given an opportunity to just come to this country. I wasn't given an opportunity to come here to work at a large bank or an institution. I was given an opportunity to come to Canada. And as a result of given that opportunity to come to Canada, I was able to achieve what I have achieved today. And the reason why I'm so passionate about diversity and our society is because opportunities like those, where a kid can come from that place in Jamaica and move to Canada and live in Malvern. Malvern is one of the toughest neighborhoods in the city of Toronto. And to me, moving to Malvern was like paradise. It's like paradise. That's how different the contrast was in my life when I came here. And as a result of meeting some amazing people over the years, I'm now where I'm at today. So I have to honor this great country as a result of it. But there are cracks in our system. And if we don't acknowledge that there are cracks in the system, then we're going to always have problems. And we're not going to be able to create the West Halls of the world and bring immigrants here and let them apply their full talent. And when I talk about the cracks in the system, I just want to talk about one thing briefly. So there was a report done back in June 1992. And if you may recall, 1992, it was the Rodney King verdict. It's pretty similar to what we're dealing with today. And Rodney King, the verdict was that the police officers that beat him almost to death got off, and they were in charge. And there were protests all over, including in Toronto. So Premier Ray at the time commissioned a report And the report is, this is the report by Stephen Lewis. And the report is on race relations in Ontario. And you saw the seal of the government on that report. And Premier Ray said to Mr. Lewis, Stephen Lewis was an ambassador, a white man. He said, I would like for you to tell us whether or not we have racism issues in this province and whether or not what we see in the U.S. is just a U.S. issue and not a Canadian issue, in particular, not an Ontario issue. And here's what Mr. Lewis wrote. He said, first, what we're dealing with at root and fundamentally is anti-Black racism. While it is obviously true that every visible minority community experiences the indignities and wounds of systemic discrimination throughout Southern Ontario, it is the Black community which is the focus. It is the Blacks who are being shot. It is Black youth that is unemployed in excessive numbers. It is Black students who are being inappropriately streamed in schools. It is Black kids who are disproportionate to dropping out. It is housing communities with large concentrations of Black residents where the sense of vulnerability and disadvantage is most acute. It is Black employees, professional and non-professional, to whom the doors of upward equity slam shut. Just as a soothing balm of multiculturalism cannot mask racism, so racism cannot mask its primary target. It is important, I believe, to acknowledge not only that racism is pervasive, but that at different times and different places, it violates certain minority communities more than others. As one member of Urban Alliance on Race Relations said, the Blacks are out front and we're all lined up behind. This was done about 30 years ago. And all we can do if we want to do a similar report is just change the date. Really, this was a government commissioned report and nothing happened in that time. So that's why I'm privileged to be having these conversations because you have the privilege and the honor of doing exactly what they failed to do over 30 years ago with correcting the system and making the system fair and equitable for everyone. And just to close, when the government of Ontario announced what we believe in the Black community to be martial law, I am a very successful Black man. I climbed to the very top of the corporate ladder in Canada. Many white people in this country have not accomplished what I've accomplished. And I was petrified to leave my house after he made an announcement on Friday. I was petrified to leave my house. My kids wouldn't leave my house because of that. Because I know I would be treated differently when I'm walking down the street, especially living in the Rosedale neighborhood that I live in. That are cracks in the foundation that we must address if we want to have a better society. So thank you, senators, and I have more to say, but we're going to let we get into the discussion later on.
Wes, thank you for that incredibly personal note to finish your comments on that drives home the reality of this issue. We now have Chief Paul back, and Chief Paul will get you off of mute and the line of 2020 and 2021. And I'll just, Chief Paul, well, I introduced you more formally earlier on, but I just want to let you know that the way I've summarized your remarkable leadership over 37 years in your community is you became leader of your community, chief of your community, and when Pierre Trudeau was prime minister, and there's been 5 more prime ministers during that 37-year period. They've grown the Canadian economy by 4.5-fold. You've grown Member Two's economy by 16-fold or more over that period. So we've got a lot to learn from you, and I look forward to, along with everyone else, to hearing your comments.
All right, thank you, Senator. Everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. You were off mute. You were off mute. We're all set. That's great.
All right. Good afternoon. I am pleased to be with you today, all the way from my beautiful community of Member 2. I want to thank Senator Dan Christmas, my longtime friend, colleague, and neighbor for inviting me to be with you for this important conversation. Coming together to talk about inclusion and how representation and diversity matters, especially in government, is an important step in moving our communities and our country forward. Here in Member 2, we've worked over the past 4 decades to uplift, educate, and succeed. Both Senator Dan and I sat at the table for some very difficult discussions in our earlier days as leaders. These discussions laid out 2 very clear paths for us. One, to remain in an economic downturn and keep the status quo within our community. Or 2, to create change and start to build something unheard of for our community. We chose to take the uncharted path and do whatever we could to find prosperity for our people. When I say we sought prosperity, I mean that in all aspects of the term. We wanted our community with prosperous economics, prosperous health and wellness, education for all, and meaningful opportunities for those that seek that. It wasn't easy. Many days, it's still not easy. But I lead each day with my Mi'kmaq values at the forefront. In Member 2, partnerships have played a key role in building to our success. Most often, those partnerships are not with other Indigenous groups, but with industry leaders. Unlike non-Indigenous partnerships, we've had to spend years building trust and credibility before we're even considered to come to the table. That's one of the biggest barriers I've seen for our communities. We're assumed not capable until proven otherwise. It happens in business and in government. Outdated views and information hold others back from working side by side or nation to nation with us. Assumptions, predetermined ideologies, and lack of time spent with our people and communities continues to lead to distance between business and government across Canada. There are resounding rewards that can come from working together in equity. Take, for example, the acquisition of Clearwater Seafoods that our community was part of this year. The $1 billion deal has been recognized as the single largest investment by an Indigenous group in Canada. It's one we feel was born out of true nation-to-nation partnerships and put together with respect for culture and community. The deal has been widely celebrated and is truly transformational for us. I look forward to speaking with my fellow panelists and taking questions about how we can work to create more diverse and inclusive systems for all today. Thank you. Walalio.
And thank you, Chief Paul. Thank you for sharing those important words around your experience and the amazing leadership you have provided your community with. We want to now move into this segment set aside for questions and answers of our panelists and opportunity for further discussion. This section will be moderated by Senator Scott Tannas. Senator Tannas is a leader of the Canadian Senators Group here in the Senate and himself a success and leader in this space. The founder of Western Financial Group and CEO of Western Investment Company of Canada, he has been both successful in both highly important companies based in Western Canada. growing his company from scratch to over 1,800 employees and working in more than 160 offices from Winnipeg to the Pacific Coast. He works through investment in strong, successful enterprises headquarters in Western Canada and brings his extraordinary experience to moderating our panelists today. Welcome, Senator Tannas.
Thanks very much, Senator Moodie, and welcome. I'm delighted to be here and honored to be able to participate. We have so much to learn from the three incredible Canadian entrepreneurs and business leaders that we have with us today. As was mentioned, we've got a unique audience for these panelists because it includes at least two important groups. Number one, legislators and advisors to legislators that are here to listen and to understand what they need to do in order to maximize chances for success for diverse entrepreneurship. But we also have a number of entrepreneurs who are looking for insights and inspiration as they go about building their respective businesses. And I encourage both groups and indeed all audience members to submit questions and answers, or questions that we can seek answers for. I'm going to start. I'll prime the pump with a couple of questions. And first of all, as business people, we know how to tell our story about our business, and we're going to get to that. But I think it's important in understanding how you came to position yourself for that success, panelists, by giving us insights into your early days. Wes, you've done a little bit of that with the picture of your humble community in Jamaica and talking about Malvern. And we'll come back to you. Shahrzad, I'm going to start with you, but all three of you, if you could give us insight into your personal beginnings, pre your success, and tell us your personal story, please. Shahrzad, over to you.
Thank you, Senator Tannas. I grew up actually in Iran during the revolution, and you could imagine that opportunities were very much so limited by the situation of where I lived. In fact, actually, as a child growing up in Iran, my future was very much so cloudy and unpredictable, and you have unpredictable array of outside influences. And statistically, as a matter of fact, I had every opportunity to fail as a woman growing up in a war-torn country in the Middle East, rather than to succeed. And growing up in Iran, really, in terms of the story of how I started BBTV, well, growing up in Iran, access to actually popular content was rationed. And inequality was an everyday reality. And we only had access to a really handful of TV channels. But I could actually see the power of content even at the small scale. So when I was 17, I moved to Vancouver by myself with just one suitcase, no computer skills, and very little English. And my passion for math and technology is what drove me to pursue computer science in university. Content, again, played a big role in my life and helped me learn the language and exposed me to new cultures. And suddenly there was so much more of it. And it was really around this time that I built the business model for BBTV. And the model came to me when I first visited CES, observing the applications of course, digital audio, which was pioneered by Steve Jobs through the invention of the iPod. And I wanted to play a pivotal role in the democratization of content, given my background. And that's part of the reason why I started Broadband TV. And experiencing inequality firsthand really creates a desire and a passion to be a positive agent for change. And it brings me back to my favorite quote by Gandhi, which is to be the change that you actually wish to see in the world. And that's why I moved to Canada, to have access to more inclusive and an equal opportunity. And I always knew, from the time that I was a young teenager, that I wanted to build a global business. And that's what, really opened up the possibility and the opportunity in building a quadruple bottom line business. And what I mean by that is that you measure success, of course, based on your financial performance, but you actually pay equal attention to people, social, and environmental KPIs. And really, because at the end of the day, it all starts with you, and we all play a role. And I believe that true success and is how we can impact the world. And that's why business is a platform for positive change. As a matter of fact, I believe that business is the greatest platform for positive change. And this is why I'm so passionate about, obviously, our quadruple bottom line. And I think that BBTV and our story is really proof that you can build a scalable global business that really enacts positive change where equal is truly equal.
Thank you. Chief Paul, I don't know your personal story prior to you taking on the role of chief and beginning what has been such a remarkable transformation of the community and of the businesses led by you. Tell us about your early days. I always find that, you know, in so many of the business genius stories that we all hear, there's a story about the person, their family, where they grew up, how they grew up, you know, that environment that shaped them in order to make them an extraordinary success. So tell us about your personal story. We're going to get to the business of Member 2 and BBTV and Kingsdale and so on in a minute. This is about your person. Tell us. You're on mute, Chief.
Good. Did you hear me?
Yes,
we can hear you.
Okay, good.
Hear you.
Yeah, well, my story is not, you know, not. I mean, it's similar to a lot of the stories where you're born into poverty. You're born on a reserve. You're born on an Indian reserve. We're called Indians. We're not even Indians. You know, the real Indians live in India, and they're all over the world, and they're beautiful, great people. You know, they're Indians. We're not. That's one probably first myth about us that started our downhill, drive to where most of our communities are today, unfortunately. And it was on the reserve. Reserves were established, where the government was believing that we would finally fade away, but we didn't. And we were, reserves, from my understanding, is kept for animals and cattle to keep them in one place to make sure that they're administered better or managed better. And that was the reason why we were put on reserves, and really not understanding why. There's so many things that I noticed while growing up, like we couldn't get work in town. We couldn't get work. The only people that really could get work was our mothers, our grandmothers that worked and did housekeeping work for the people that lived in the city here. The men, one thing that we're very good at is adapting, and we adapted to what was needed at the time. And in fact, we even made hockey sticks because that was a need for it, and that was that was a commodity that people wanted, handmade hockey sticks. And by the way, I mean, that's another story. I firmly believe that Mi'kmaq, if we didn't invent hockey, we at least invented a precursor to that. So that story sticks in my mind, and I will be pursuing that a lot more, for sure. But the houses, really one room, no plumbing. I mean, lucky to get a meal a day, really. And most of it was from the woods, really, or fishing. So it was really a lot of barriers. Like, I mean, it's going on. Like, I mean, I remember like before 1960, like we couldn't go past grade 6 unless we enfranchised. And the meaning of the word in Canada is enfranchisement is that you give up your rights as a Mi'kmaq and any other Indigenous person in the country. If we wanted to serve in a war, and most all of us volunteered, most of our Indigenous people volunteered to serve in a war. But a lot of them were stopped, like were stopped in England before they went any further. And we're told that in order to fight for your country, you will have to give up your rights as a Mi'kmaq. Now, sign here. So there's a number of barriers that we, we faced growing up. So I was just fortunate enough to, I guess, be stubborn and never give up, and don't accept the word no, and keep pushing and keep moving it. And I know that if people work together, they can accomplish a lot of things. I was fortunate enough that when I was in my younger days, like a lot of other people around my age, the late teens, early 20s, that I went off to Boston to get a job. I mean, there was work there, like for anybody that wanted to work. I mean, they might have been factory jobs, but at least it was work. And I was just amazed with how much work there was. Like, even though it was just that property minimum wage was a hell of a lot more than we've earned back home. And I ended up working for a service organization there in Boston, the Boston Indian Council, where it looked after about 30 different tribes. And it was a pretty transient population. They were mostly students or armed forces or people that were just there for a certain amount of time. So really learned a lot. I learned that we were all pretty well being treated the same, whether you're in Canada or United States. You know, if you were a person, I guess what they say, of color, I don't see the difference. You know, and this is part of what contributes to like the fear and the differences that we have. Like, you know, where there are people of color. And I guess the other side is people of no color. It's just, I mean, we're all the same color. It's just different shades of it. That's all, for God's sake, like, you know, and that's where it's at, you know. But when you hear about, even in Canada, like, you know, if you're from Ireland or France or Scotland or anything, you're a Canadian, you're a regular Canadian. But if you come from Asia, you're an Asian Canadian. Or if you come from Africa or somewhere, or your ancestries, or you're African Canadian. We're native Canadians, I guess, you know, whatever. Mm-hmm. I thought we were Canadian, if you really want to label us, you know.
Original, so, I think that's called original Canadians, Chief.
Original Canadians, yeah.
I'm going to move next to Wes, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit about your individual businesses. Wes, do you have anything to add on your beginnings? And then why don't you also pick up and talk about Kingsdale, the formation of your business, and tell us a little bit about what it is that Kingsdale is, and maybe if you want to add a little color, kind of where, when you really knew you had something.
Well, that's, thank you again, Senator Tannas. So I showed the picture of that plantation house. I didn't say it was a plantation house, but it was a plantation house. My grandmother worked on a plantation in Jamaica. And so we were raised on that plantation, and that house was given to each of the plantation workers by the plantation owners to raise their family. That place was 2 bedrooms. And so we all were crowded in that 2-bedroom place. And my grandmother was looking after us all. So she would work, depending on the season, on the sugarcane plantation. And if you think about this woman bent over for 8-9 hours, chopping sugarcane with the machete chopping it at the roots, and then taking it off at the top. And then she would put them in piles. And she only would rest for taking water and to wipe her sweat. And she did that for hours because she's paid based on how much sugarcane she chops. And then the next season, we would do coconut. We would actually pile up coconuts, and then a tractor would come and get them away. And I remember going to work with her because as a young child, then we would do banana. The interesting thing about banana, you have this knife that you cut the stem, and there's a sap that comes from the banana, and we would be covered with sap at the end of the day. And you would go back to that plantation house and didn't have running water, didn't have electricity. We'd have to go to the river to catch water, and that's our chore as children. So my dad left Jamaica in 1970 to come to Canada. And he didn't want to go to any other country. He wanted Canada because, and you know, you think about it, back in the day, people wanted to go to the US. They didn't really want to come to Canada because Canada was known as a cold place. But my dad specifically I want to go to Canada because he read so much about Canada. And he loved just the vibe of Canada. And he was a professional cricketer. And he left and he came here. And he built a life. He got married here. He built a life for himself here. And when I was 16 years old, he said, listen, it's time for me to bring my son that I fathered in Jamaica to live with me here. And he brought me here. I lived with my dad for 2 years because I didn't know him, and we didn't have a relationship. I moved out my senior year of high school to live on my own and finish my schooling on my own. And I did some amazing jobs like catching chickens for a living. That's not amazing, but boy, it's if you want to know what not to do some horrible jobs. I cleaned offices, and my first job on Bay Street was in the mailroom of a law firm. And that's when I saw the possibility of the other side of life, right? Because I grew up in Scarborough. I spent those years in Scarborough, and the possibilities are limited in Scarborough, right? The jobs that you can do is completely limited. You work at a factory, you work maybe at a restaurant, but that's it. But then I came to the other side of Canada, which was downtown Toronto on Bay Street in the mailroom, and I saw the possibility of wealth. So when I look at Canada, you know, and I listen to Chief Terry Paul about the different colors and all that, I don't see Canada doesn't really have a color problem. There's two distinctions that Canada has. It's people with privilege and people without privilege. And the people with privilege, unfortunately, they all look the same. And the people without privilege, they unfortunately all look the same as well. And so when I went down to Bay Street, I saw all these amazing people with privileges. And I was driving the mail cart, going down the hallway, and I look at offices and I see these lawyers on the desk and, you know, behind, you know, having conference calls, and they were just like, they were up here. And I go, I want to be one of those guys. I want to figure that out. And eventually I figured it out. And I figured it out by watching the people with privilege. I watch how they operated. I watch how they network. I watch all those things by pushing that mail cart. And I started to emulate how the people with privileges operate and how they got their privileges. And as a result of emulating them, I was able to say, one day I'm going to start my own company, and I'm going to build the most successful company in space in this country. I didn't know how I was going to do that, but I ended up coming up with this idea that there's going to be this thing called shareholder activism, which didn't exist back in 2003. And I said, I'm going to build a firm that's going to advise these public companies, these white folks, how to deal with issues on when they're confronted with tough issues from shareholders, or when they're involved in hostile takeover bids and different things. I want to build that company. And so I was 34 years old, and I had this passion to do this. And I went to all the banks to get financing with amazing business plan, and every single one of them turned me down. And I didn't know why. Until later on, I found out that you're a 34-year-old Black man going into the boardrooms of corporate Canada, which were all middle-aged white men. At the time, that's what they were. And you're going to tell them how to handle issues from their shareholders and all that? Why don't they just go to their investment banker across the street? I didn't, because the bank's job was to assess risk. And I had a risky business plan, and none of them backed my risky business plan. I went into the bank, and that's why representation matters. I walked into CIBC when all the tellers and desks were on the ground level, and I saw one black man behind the desk. His name is Lancelot Day. And I went to him with my business plan, and Lance said, I love it. Do you own your own home? I said, yes. Come back in a week. And a week later, he loaned me $100,000 to start Kingsdale. And Kingsdale was born as a result of seeing that one black man behind a desk, and he understood me. He didn't look at my color. And he gave me the money, and I started a business. And within 5 years of starting Kingsdale, the company was valued at $100 million. And so that's when we strip past the color and just look at the capability, how much greater this country can be.
That's an amazing story. Thank you. Thank you, Wes. Shahrzad, can you tell us about BBTV and how you came to this and when you knew you had something? And also, if you could maybe just mention some of the obstacles that you encountered.
Definitely, Senator Tannas. And I'm sure that I'm happy that we're getting to the solutions, because as much as all these stories are inspiring, I think we need to focus on solutions and talking about how we can actually make progress. With respect to BBTV, we're a media tech company, and we help creators. And when I say creators, is really anyone from an individual creator to a large media company like the NBA or Sony Pictures to become more successful digitally by growing their views and revenues. And you can think of us as really a one-stop shop that helps, that has the tools and the solutions to help creators grow their audience and make more money. Why is this important? Because, we are consuming more content than ever before. For example, if you look at the US, people are spending on average 16 years of their life watching digital content. And this is actually growing. And at the same time, when you're looking at video supply is on the rise. You have more than 500 hours of content that is being uploaded to platforms like YouTube every minute. And then with this rapid growth of supply and demand, content creators really need help to be able to be successful and get their content in front of the right audience. And this is exactly what we solve for. Today, we're the second largest video property in the world after Google. We reach 600 million unique viewers every month that are generating 40 billion views. And we're a global business, obviously operated, and HQ is out of Vancouver, Canada, which we're very much so proud of that. We operate in 30 countries and 12 languages. And as Senator Moodie mentioned, I did take the company public last fall, and our IPO was the largest in history with a sole female founder and CEO across all the sectors. And it was also one of the top 10 tech IPOs in Canada. But this is obviously as great as it sounds. It just talks about how we still have a long way to go. I hope that, of course, women and girls, they can actually see themselves in this moment and realize that really no achievement is out of reach, no matter what corner of the world you come from. And as a proud Canadian, this is really a testament to how diversity can actually foster a more equal and representative world, while also, of course, powering a prosperous economy. Now, talking about Senator Tannas in terms of the overcoming adversity and obstacles, I believe, as I mentioned earlier, in equality in all of its forms. And it's really important to note that one focus on diversity can actually help with others. Inclusivity creates inclusivity. Now, to talk specifically about gender equality, over half of the women in the world don't have their own income. And that's really a quarter of the world's working population that can be contributing to actually stronger economies, which is really more opportunities for all of us. McKinsey actually reported that if you were to close the gap, we're talking about $28 trillion in terms of impact to the global GDP by 2025, which is really an increase of 26%. If women played an identical role to men in the labor market, and closing the gap in Canada would add $150 billion to the Canadian economy by 2026. So this is no longer the right thing to do. it's not the, it's really the smart thing to do, as we talk about it a lot. COVID also has impacted this even more negatively. We see that, across all the G20 countries, including Canada, and talking about numbers in Canada, since February of 2020, more than 80,000 women ages 15 or older have left the labor force, compared to about 25,000 men. And women actually represented the majority of the workers in industries that are most affected by the pandemic-related restrictions, from the service industry to hospitality and tourism sectors. And this was really the first recession where women were impacted more than men. So how can we actually make a difference, which is, Senator Tannas, to your point? Well, first and foremost, we need to really eradicate the idea that it's up to women to increase their participation in the economy. Men should take their ownership and participate, as they're in majority of decision-making roles. And when you're looking at women's economic empowerment, it's really a societal issue that impacts everyone, and it really relies on both men and women taking leadership to make this a reality. And second is really leadership and accountability are crucial for achieving success. Speaking from the private sector, the key to successful implementation is all about setting goals, tracking goals, and reporting on progress. Each company needs to set the indicators and the targets according to, of course, their specific realities and circumstances. And we need to really outline a concrete action plan on how to achieve targets relating to fair recruiting, retention, progression strategies, sufficient care facilities, and closing the gender pay gap, amongst having obviously the right set of policies that protect women in the workplace. Overall, as business, political, and community leaders, we actually need to be held accountable. Now, my ask for the legislators in the room, and Senator Tannas, you started by saying that the audience in the room, we have legislators and we have entrepreneurs. And I have an ask for each of those groups. My ask, for the legislators, as a progressive country with progressive leadership, my ask for the legislator in this room is to follow suit of Spain, Iceland, Finland, California, with really their exceptional steps to gender and intersectional equality. Set targets to increase female board representation. California's SB 826 law requires that publicly held companies in the state actually need to have at least one female board member, with the higher amounts depending on the size of the business. Iceland and Spain have introduced legislation requiring 40% female board representation on publicly traded companies. You look at Finland, requires 40% of state-owned enterprises to have female directors for 40% of their board seats. Now, Canada has the roadmap to make meaningful change in our country, and there's no better time than now. The 30-50 challenge that was initiated last year is really a great start, but it's this is really more than a challenge. We need to set targets. We need to track success. We need to set a roadmap and really enable businesses to drive change within and without. Now, in terms of the private sector, as leaders in the private sector, my ask for you is, we really need to recognize the importance of setting, tracking, and measuring goals as it relates to obviously equality. And McKinsey has pointed out that how performance to ESG goals isn't just business of good, but it's good business. It has become a key component for high performance businesses around the world, especially investors and customers are now looking to ESG goals when it comes to allocating money. And businesses, as I mentioned, can be the greatest platform for change, especially when women's representation in leadership positions is only improved by 3% across all the G20 countries in the last 10 years. And it's actually declined in Canada by 1% over the last 10 years. And I do want to highlight that with respect to G20 Empower, the reason why we established G20 Empower is the private sector alliance that is really aiming at advancing representation of women in leadership positions in Canada and across all G20 countries. And for us, it's about encouraging, the private sector, to join as advocates and play a role in a very important issue by enabling a quarter of the workforce. And of course, the same thing in Canada. by measuring the goals in your business and really advancing representation and leadership?
We all know and entrepreneurs know that what gets measured gets managed, and the fact I take your point perfectly. I think you've made it very, very well that we are, if I hear you right, we are at a point where we need to start setting goals and actually managing toward them as legislators, and the areas that you've mentioned, I think, are critical to that. Thank you. Look, we've got half an hour. I know Josh is going to be elbowing me here to say that we've got to get a little more concise. We've got 10 questions from the audience, and we have a question I know from Senator Moodie as well. So I'm going to suggest that we move right away to questions, and we'll start with Senator Moodie, please.
Thank you, Senator Tannas, and I'll be quick about this. You know, as an immigrant myself to Canada, this has been such an important discussion, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. But as we all of you are unique and talented in your own right, not to mention highly successful. Despite the barriers and challenges that you've encountered on your journey, now as you reflect on how to assist others in understanding what it takes to overcome systemic barriers, can you share with us what you would consider to be the secret sauce, if you will, the one thing, whether it be a trait, a goal, or a belief system that you hold that helped you push through to achieve success?
Okay, and I'm going to ask that you limit your description to 1 minute each, and we'll start with Chief Paul. You're on already, sir. Just you can start talking.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I called it. I guess I called it earlier, stubbornness, but like you know, it's the strong will that I feel I have, you know, and that I have the confidence of being who I am, being a Mi'kmaq, and I know that I belong just as much as anybody else in this country, and we do, and we have a culture and we have a language that can contribute to the progress of the country, and we've proven that, and you know, it's never accepting no for an answer.
Thank you. Wes?
So I always use sports as an analogy, and I use football in the case to describe myself. In particular, the position in football is a running back. The job of a running back is to get hit all the time because his job is to carry the football. And every time he carries a football, everybody chases a football and try to hit him. And they try to keep him down, try to get him to fumble, try to get him off his game. But he's built to take those hits. And when you hit him, he just spring right back up and he's at you again. In fact, he'd spring back up and spike the football in the person's face that hit him and say, "You're never going to keep me down." And whenever he sees a little bit of daylight, not a lot, just a little bit, he just darts through that hole. Next thing you know, he's getting a touchdown. But what happens when a quarterback tries to be a running back? They take him off the field because he's not built to be hit all the time. And so, you know, when you're a racialized person in a non-racialized world, especially when you're Black on Bay Street, you are that running back and you're going to get hit a lot. And your job is to make sure that if you want to survive that environment, you have to just keep getting up and up and up again. So the reason why I started Black North is because I don't want all Black people or people of color to be running backs. I want them to be themselves. I want them to be educated, get out of school, get into a job, work hard, get promoted, and the only place that they can go is up, provided that their talent puts them in that direction. If their talent doesn't, a running back, if he doesn't have talent, he's not going to be on the field, okay? So what we want to make sure is that we create an environment whereby people can be who they are, how they're trained, and get the job that's designed for them to do based on their intellect and their capabilities and capacity. So I would say resilience is the one word to describe who I am and how I got this far.
Thanks, Wes. Shahrzad?
I'm going to keep it short and concise. When it comes to actually key drivers in becoming a successful entrepreneur, one, you got to go after large pools of opportunity. Don't solve a small problem if you can actually solve a larger problem. And this particularly is one of the factors that we see in women. Solve a big problem. Two, follow your passion. You won't succeed if you actually don't have passion for what you do. Three, hard work and perseverance is an absolute given. No one makes a success overnight. Success overnight doesn't exist. And then, of course, you need to really keep your eye on your long-term vision and stay committed to what you're really ultimately trying to achieve. And of course, surround yourself with amazing people that will support you. So those are my 5 pieces of advice if you want to be successful.
Thank you, Shahrzad. We're going to go now to questions from the audience. Josh, have you got one that you want to read out?
Yeah, so there's a question from, there's 2 questions that would probably go to Chief Paul. So the first is it true that is true First Nations prosperity and economic equity possible under the Indian Act? What needs to be changed? And a second one to kind of go along with it is, how will Clearwater change now that its ownership has changed? What's ahead? So now that it's a First Nations owned company, does it have a different mandate or vision?
2 incredible questions that I'm going to ask you to distill to 2 minutes, Chief Paul.
Okay, first one, the Indian Act, essentially starting from scratch. It should be scrapped yesterday. You know, we don't rely on it that much anymore, thank God, you know, and or thank whoever helped us do that, you know. And it's in the Indian Act is set up in the communities to end up being 100% reliant on them. And that's not a place to be, really, where you're 100% reliant on the government. So we went from that in the early 90s, and now we're 87% of our revenues are our own source revenues. So that's the change that can happen, really. And the other question on Clearwater, as I said, mentioned earlier, it's transformational for us. It's a game changer for Indigenous people, I feel, across the country. And it's a catalyst for more acquisitions like these. We're 50% owners. We have 50% say in what happens with the company. I'm just absolutely fortunate that we have a partner from British Columbia that has a track record that is, I couldn't believe what they have done and what they can do. And we know that this was the best move we made in partnering with a company like Premium Brands. And they don't buy companies. They buy management. And they help grow that company and make it better than what it was. And we're seeing that already. And we're very fortunate. And what we want to do, we have a worldwide presence pretty well in every country that eats fish. We sell them fish. So it's a game changer. We have structures in place where our people can look at it as Clearwater University, where we have opportunities for our people, and any position is open anywhere from the deckhand all the way to the CEO if they're qualified.
Okay, thank you. Josh, next question.
So the next question is from Senator Marty Deacon to Mr. Hall. She says, thank you, everyone. To Mr. Hall, I have followed the pledges, commitments, and establishment of committees with Black North. I have tried to follow the work of the committees with a focus on business and education. Can you share with us what your measures for success or your hopes for success will be by the end of year 2 that demonstrates action at the most vulnerable levels?
Thank you for that question. So we have 16 committees that's part of the Black North Initiative, and each of those committees are set up to address each systemic barriers that Black folks face. So we have, for example, the Economic Empowerment Committee, and that's really there to take the barriers down or remove the barriers with respect to Black people accessing capital to start their businesses, to buy homes and do different things that create successful people in this country. We also have the Education Committee, which is there to mentor not only high school kids, but also university grads and also newly minted executives and board members to provide mentors for those individuals. So we're hoping that within a year so far, we haven't even celebrated our anniversary yet. June is going to be the first year. We're going to have a number of things to announce to show the impact that we've made on the community. We still have a lot of work to do, but I think in the next 2 years, you're going to see massive changes because, as I say, it doesn't really take thousands and thousands of people to make change. It takes a handful of the willing to make meaningful change.
Thank you. Josh, next question.
Peter Hadwin asks, how can governance change in government and large organizations to ensure cultural behaviors and systemic processes never again cause inequality, lack of inclusion, and outright racism to ensure sustained progress?
I'm going to ask Shahrzad to answer that.
Sure. Really good question. I would actually say that, specifically when you're talking about gender, because, not all forms of diversity can be measured. When it comes to gender diversity, this is something that can be tracked and, you can set goals. And as I mentioned, it's really important to budget for all bottom lines and apply the same attention to detail that you give your financial goals, as they will continue to be, as it really helps every organization to be a healthier organization, a more successful organization. And I can give you an example for BBTV. When it comes to our people KPIs, we've implemented gender interviewing policy that really ensures we always interview at least 2 qualified female and male candidates for every open role. We also, for example, at BBTV, we have a gender pay gap is 0%, and it has been like that for the last 5 years. And it came down to just us really budgeting for it, setting goals, and really connecting it to performance targets for all of our managers. So I really believe in, specifically setting targets, both short-term and longer term, to be able to achieve results.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Next question, Josh.
Senator Mubina Jaffer asks, Mr. Hall, I know what it is like when my daughter is stopped by the police because of her color, and the police give her no reason why they have stopped her. What is the one thing you think we legislators can implement to change the lives of our children?
Well, when this announcement came out on Friday, and I said to my son, I was so upset about it, and he said, but Dad, the Supreme Court of Canada says there's a law that if you're driving down the street, the police can just stop you because you're on a public road, and they don't have to give a reason. And he sent the case law to me. And that's actually worse than the US. Think about it. It's actually worse than the United States. So I can be driving my car, which happens to me quite often, quite frankly, and I'm thinking my civil rights were being violated, but it wasn't. It's actually the law that says that can happen. So as legislators, you have to look at the legislation and go, can it be abused, first of all? And make sure that when legislation are put in place, that inclusivity is a part of it. Like, for example, if the premier on Friday, when he put the legislation about stopping people, if he had Black people like myself that he consulted with, they're part of that group, he would never have done it. He would never, because we have so much passion, because we know the impact that it has. So you have to have people like myself, people that represent the community that you're trying to serve on those committees, making decisions in order for you to make sure that there are no blind spots to the rules and laws that you put in place.
Thank you. Josh, next question. We've got time for 1 or 2 more.
Right. So Senator Tony Lofreda asked, if we look at common challenges, can you share which one of these challenges was the most difficult to overcome? financing, partners, clients, employees, etc. Most important piece of advice you would share with young entrepreneurs and anything you would do differently. And parallel to that, Senator Miji is asking about experiencing difficulties in getting financing from a bank if you are a Black or racialized person, and have there been differences when there have been white partners included in the request from the bank?
Okay, so I'm going to ask each one of you to give me no more than a minute on that, just specifically around where you've encountered the biggest obstacles, whether it was financing, whether it was finding partnerships, et cetera. And if you could, I'll start with you, Shahrzad.
Sure. I think, when it comes to the greatest challenge, honestly, I think, being a woman, female entrepreneur, usually, you see this because we don't have many examples and we know that the numbers are very small. Investors and financing partners are just not used to investing in female CEOs and founders. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges that I faced starting the company, and also being out of Canada and not wanting to run a global business out of Canada was the other thing where, once we secured financing, many investors in the earlier days, they really wanted us to move the company to California. So we did really have to fight hard to keep the company out of Vancouver and grow the business, a global business out of Vancouver. And I would say that, how do you overcome that? Be prepared. Make sure that you're the smartest person in the room. Be over prepared when you go to the meetings, because when you know what you're talking about, everyone is going to listen to you. So I think preparation is the best tool that you'll have to be able to make sure that you actually get anyone in the room convinced, including when it comes to investors.
Fantastic. Chief Paul.
Well, in our case, the Indian Act is one of the biggest obstacles in getting capital, really, and it's because of their. It's the act itself, the regulations within the so, and I feel that the government can make those changes, and they have those tools in place. They have policy levers that would. Remove those barriers, and we know, for example, the banks, they have a scorecard on anyone that goes to them. We, even our communities, the area you're from, in ours, member two, for the longest time, they had a different scorecard, even though we had a better rating than others. It's because of where we lived and what we can do with our assets. We can't encumber them. The banks aren't allowed to receive our assets as chattel. It doesn't, and that's one of the bigger problems. And of course, other variables there, other factors, for example, are where we live. So it's a lower score, so higher interest rates you end up paying, and much shorter terms. So we have those obstacles. But I've learned early, though, one thing I want to say is that, and I'm not sure if the big banks are listening or bankers are listening, but I was told by a very wise person, is that you trust none of them, but you use them all. All right, so that's what we do. But we also, have programs that have been developed by Indigenous people, where we're able to get access to private capital. And this is where I feel is the biggest answer for us, for all of us, particularly the Indigenous people, because a greater percent of our monies come from public monies. Again, I say that is not a good situation to be in. The world is about it's a private world, and there's private money, and there's all kinds of private capital out there if you know how to reach it. So there has been institutions built for that purpose, and we are fully utilizing those.
Yes, and you were a leader in that, Chief Paul. You were one of the early people in those bond offerings, right? Member two was, correct?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
That's great. Look, I'm going to ask Wes for an answer, and then we're going to move to wrap up with Senator Moodie and final thoughts from the panelists. Wes, on this issue.
Yeah, so I would say that absolutely the banks are not friendly to Black entrepreneurs. I'm a perfect example of that on a number of occasions. One of the companies I wanted to buy a number of years ago, the bank didn't really like the company. The company was being sold for $13 million. I thought it was a great deal and struck this great deal. I went to the bank to get financing and they turned me down in the first go. And I said, what are you talking about? And they came back again and they said, no, we don't like the deal. We don't think you're meant for this deal. And they turned it down. At the time, the bank had $100 million of my money and they wouldn't loan me $13 million. And finally, I pushed all the way up and it came back down and said, okay, we'll loan you the money, but you're going to have to give us $13 million in capital plus a personal guarantee. And so I took my money and went to another bank. That business within 5 years, that business is still here today. And that business now is worth $60 million today. The government came out last year and said, we're going to do this Black Entrepreneur Program and we're going to let the banks administer it. Now, they clearly didn't consult with the Black community, at least not with the people that matters in the Black community, because they would know that that's the worst thing for you to do. You cannot, because I've known a lot of white Canadians with less liquidity than I am, less liquidity, and they have massive amount of access to capital easily. And so one particular story I want to say quickly is when I started Kingsdale, years into Kingsdale, I went to one of the large banks and I was doing a deal with the large banks and I was there by myself. I walked into the boardroom and all these executives from the bank there, and they really treated me as if I was a nobody. They spoke down to me. They didn't appreciate any of the things that was presented. And then all of a sudden I said, you know what, the next meeting I'm going to have my business partner come into the meeting. And it just so happened that my business partner, who wasn't really my business partner, but it was a white man in his 50s with gray hair, he walked into the meeting and I shut up and let him speak on my behalf. I owned 100% of the company and I just identified as my business partner. And we got 100% of the things that we wanted from the bank with all kinds of respect. And that happens today. So there's a lot of transformation that has to happen. Now, I have to say this, that on a positive note, that I have 2 bank executives on the Black North board and have made commitments. A number of banks have made commitments that we're going to change the conversation. So I'm optimistic that this will change, but I think we have a long ways to go to make that happen.
Thank you, Wes. Quickly, I'm going to turn it over and get out of the way. Senator Moodie, please lead us through the wrap-up.
Thank you to the panelists today. You've described your stories and the intersectionality of racism and sexism being a barrier that continues to outlive your individual remarkable success. We in Canada need to aim for a Canada where the barriers are no longer there. Thank you again. And I'd like to just ask each of the panelists in 1 minute or less for your 3 key points that influential parliamentarians need to take away that you don't want us to miss.
Let's start with Wes. We'll start with Wes this time, and then Shahrzad, and we'll leave Chief Terry Paul to wrap up. Okay.
So let's say when you look at policies and legislation, to definitely be inclusive and look at the communities that you represent and make sure that your blind spots are covered. The Prime Minister said yesterday that it's government's job to protect its citizens, and I do believe that it is the case. So how do we go about protecting all our citizens to make sure, for example, with COVID, to make sure that the vaccines are available in underserved communities and not just in rich neighborhoods and so on? So are we protecting all our citizens? And when we think about our immigration plan, for example, when we bring people here into this beautiful country of ours and we bring them and take their talent from where they are we really applying them? Are we really using that resource that they're bringing, that rich resource that they're bringing to this country? Are we utilizing that? And if we are, we're going to be a better society for it. So we want to make sure that governments and private sectors are working together, because right now there's a disconnect. Governments and private sectors are not working together to make changes. And if they start working together, we're going to see massive positive changes in our society.
Shahrzad?
I would say I'll just go back. I have a simple ask. I did already speak to it earlier. Set the tone and example regarding gender equity in all forms of diversity. And as I mentioned to you earlier, many other countries have done this. We need our legislators to actually set targets when it comes to female representation at the board level, leadership level, at the manager level, across the public and the private sector. And really, let's make sure that we keep on building the momentum. Obviously, this is a topic that is in discussion. And I think we've got great momentum. And really, let's think about the kind of impact we can actually make by really mobilizing a quarter of the potential workforce, and how that can actually further impact not just our economies, which is really the topic of this panel, in terms of how diversity can help and really create a more prosperous economy. Let's do that by encouraging the private sector in achieving that, and also to make sure that our communities are a lot more exclusive. We've done it at BBTV. We're a tech company, and we have a 0% gender pay gap, 40% female representation under the board, company, and the manager level. If we've done it, everyone else can do it too.
Thank you. Chief Paul.
All right, thank you. To me, inclusivity is the responsibility of everyone. And we all have something to learn from one another. We need to realize that we are far more alike than we are different. So we should be celebrating our differences and our similarities. In my case, Indigenous Canadians, Mi'kmaq, have important work and skills to share in all sectors, in all areas of the country. Work with the Indigenous groups should be derived from true inclusivity rather than just checking the box off. So with that, I really enjoyed our discussion today, and I want to thank my fellow panelists for their words too. I take them to heart, and you are very brilliant young people. Thank you.
Scott, I think you were on mute there. Oh, you're on.
Sorry about that. I got it backwards. So we now have 4 minutes left, and Senator Moodie, Senator Deacon, over to you for final thoughts. And thank you for allowing me to participate with such a tremendous group of panelists.
Senator Moodie, if I could just offer a couple comments. I want to thank Senator Tannas and you and Senator Christmas in particular for helping to set this up. It has been such an honor to sit and listen to the thoughtful and insightful responses from Shahrzad Rafati, Chief Terry Paul, and my friend Wes Hall. We have got so much to learn. I have been learning a lot over the last years that I've joined the Senate in particular, and the role that we all have to be actively anti-racist as a path to absolutely unlocking tremendous opportunity for our country. You each demonstrate this in spades. We have to make sure we learn what it takes to make this so it's not one-offs, that it's a systematic approach that we take in our country to being inclusive and embracing diversity. So I just want to thank you all. Senator Moodie, over to you, and thank you so much for your work.
And my final words will be focused on thanking again the panelists for being with us today, for giving us your time. It's been tremendous working with you. And also thank you to the staff who supported this event. It's a lot of work, and they took it on with gusto. And I think we have all enjoyed our time here talking together. So thank you all, and we'll close today for now. Bye-bye.